In this video, we will learn how to use files with Node.js. Node has a module called fs, which is used for working with the file system asynchronously. Typically, there are two ways to work asynchronously. The first is with the use of callback functions, and the second is with promises. So in this video, we will learn how to use the Node module fs for working with the file system using callback functions. So what is the callback approach? The callback approach takes a callback function as its last argument and invokes the operation asynchronously. So if we want to read a file, we want to write a file, whatever we want to do, the last argument is a callback function which invokes the operation asynchronously. Arguments passed to this callback function or arguments passed when the operation is complete to this callback function depend upon the method. However, and this is very important, the first argument is always reserved for errors. If the operation is completed successfully, then this first argument, which is reserved for errors, is null or undefined. So how can we use callback approach? So here is an example. We are trying to read a file. So file name is the name of the file. UTF-8 means we want to read it as a text in ASCII. And this is our callback function. So you can see function. It takes two parameters, air and content. Because we are reading a file, so all the data that we read will come in content. And the first argument to this callback function is an error. So if error, console.log error. So we are logging it onto the console, else we know this function, the read file was successful, we can log the content. So this is how the callback approach is being used here. Similarly, if we want to write a file, so we're calling write file with the file name, the data we want to write. And here we have a function with only one parameter here. Why only one parameter? Because write file will just write it or it will give us an error. So we don't get any output from it. And if there was an error, we can print it onto the console. So here in this case, this is a callback function that we are using, and this is the second callback function we are using. And in both the cases, the first argument is error. So let us write some code and use the file function, say stats, access, read file, write file, and append file. So these are some of the file functions, the most commonly used file functions. So we will go through them, and then you can check out the Node documentation if you need more file functions. So let us start writing our code. So let's first fs equal to require fs. So we get that module. Now what do we want to do? Suppose the first thing we want to do was, if we go back and look at it, we have stats, access, read file, write file, append file. Let's put those, all the 5 that we want to do. So we want to get the stats of a file, access, read, write, and append. These are the 5 things we want to do. So let us start writing our code. The first thing we will do is stat, which gives us the stats of a file. So the file we want to say is, there is this file hello.txt. So I can less it and I can see it. So this has the content, and we want to get the details of this file. So function get stat, it takes the file name as a parameter. Let's just do a console.log stat file name, and how do we read it? fs.stat file name, comma, and then the callback function, function air, comma, content. If air, so if air is truthy, means there was an error. console.log error, else console.log content. Let's run this code. So let f name is equal to hello.txt and we just call get stat with f name. Let's run this code and we get all the stats for it. So these are the stats that we get. Similarly, we can check for access. Access is used to check whether we can use this file or not. So we can just say function check access file name. Again, very similar to it. So let's just do a console.log access file name fs.access file name. And what does access do? If there is an error, it just returns an error. So we can just say if error, then what should we do? We should print on the file that, or we can just say error is truthy, which means console.log does not exist. Else we can just say console.log exists. So this is what we can do. And let's now call, say, check access with this f name. And this file exists. Let's put in some other name, say hello11. This file does not exist, we know that. And what do we get? This file does not exist. If we try and get the stat for this file, what will that be? We get an error, no such file or directory. So stat or check access is used for this purpose. Next, let's read the data of this file. So how would we read this file? So function read file console.log read file fs.readFile. What does it take as parameters? The file name, the format in which we want to read it. So we want to read it as UTF-8, which is our ASCII format, and the callback function. Error, comma, content or data or whatever we want to call it. So let's maybe call it, say, content, or let's call it data. For if error is truthy, we just console.log error, else console.log data. Let's do a read file f name Now in this case, this file does not exist, so we get this error. If we run it with a file that exists, let's see, what do we get? We get the text of that file. So this is read file. So we have seen access, read file, get stat. Now let's look at the write ones, which are write and append. So let's define a write file. So function write file, file name, comma, the data to write. Let's maybe, if we now understand it, let's just copy some code and modify it. So write file, and it is write file. If error console.log. So write file just returns an error if the write failed. Otherwise, it does not return anything. So Let's now call, say, write file f name comma, let's say a b, or let's call it xyz xyz. Let's write this string. Let's run this code, and here we get an error. Callback must be function received undefined. Why did we get this undefined here? So we had to pass data here, the data to be written. We did not do that. Let's run it again. And now we have written it to the file. Let's read that file now to see what is the content of this file. And the content of this file is now xyz. So you can see that this file has been rewritten. The earlier text in it, which was there, has been rewritten. So write file rewrites the file. If we want to write it at the end of the file, we should use append file. So append will append it to the file, as the name suggests. So let's just copy this code. So append file, and we are calling the append file function. Let us now say append file f name comma, let's call it, say, pqr. Let's run this code, and now let's read this file. So you can see this text has been appended. So the difference between write and append is write will rewrite the file, so the existing data is lost, whereas in the case of append, we have appended it to the file. So this is how we have used all these functions. And why is it important to understand that they are asynchronous? What does that mean? So let's maybe say we do a read file, then let's say we do an append file. Let's call it, say, hello 1 2 3 4. Let's then do a read file, then let's say do a write file, say a b c d a b c d, and then let's do a read file. So ideally we would want to see, initially we should get the string, which is the text in read file, then we should get this appended with the read file, and then we should get this value. Let's run this code and let's see what do we get. So we have called read file. Before the output of this was printed, append file has been called. Before the output of append file, we get the next read file, the next write file, the next read file. And hence we are just getting the final value for each one of them. Now, why is this the case? In the case of asynchronous, it did not wait for this function to finish before calling this append file. That is why it is asynchronous, and hence we did not get our different outputs. So next we will look at examples of how to handle that. So let's look at that exercise. Take a text as input from the user, append the text to a file, and then read the file and display all its contents. So we need to do both these things, and after the append is over, then we need to read the file and display all its contents. So what all do we need? Let's say let fs is equal to require fs. Now we want to read from a file, take input. So how can we take input? So the common way of taking input is to install something known as readline sync. So let's use it. Let readline is equal to require readline sync. So you will need to go ahead and install it. So first go ahead and do an npm install readline sync. I have already installed it, so I'm not installing it, but you will need to install it before you can use it. So now what do we need to do? We need to take a text as input. Let's first define a file name. Let's say file name is hello.txt, or let's call it say some other name, abcd.txt. Now what do we need to take? We need to take a string as input. So let's say let txt is equal to read line dot question, enter text to be appended to file. So we will get that text as input. Now what do we need to do? We need to append that text into this file. So we can just say fs.appendFile. Now if this file does not exist, append file will create it. So right now this file does not exist, so it will just create it. What is the name? Fname. What is it that we want to write? Text comma function error. If error console.log error, else, this means the append is successful. So now in this else we will read the file. So we can just say fs.readFile. What is the file name? Fname. What format? UTF-8. Let's for a minute forget to give UTF-8. And then what will we give? Function error comma say content if error console.log error, else console.log content. So we have not given the format deliberately. Let's see what comes out of it. So let's now call this function so this should not have been fs.readline, it should just have been readline. Let's run it again. So enter text to be appended to file. Let's say it is qwerty. And what you can see that we have been able to read the file, but it is showing some octets. So what should we have done here? While reading the file, if we give say a UTF-8, then we will get it in the string format that we were looking for. Let's run it again and let's append to the string. We gave it till y uiop, and you can see we have gotten the whole text. So note in this case, because it is an asynchronous function, we did not complete this and just below it write it. We wrote the next command within that else. So at this point we know this function has returned, which means we have gotten the response of it. The append file is over, and then within it we wrote the read file. Let's look at the next exercise. Take a file name and text as input from the user. Check whether the file name exists. If exists, display the contents of the file and then append the text to it. Otherwise, write it to a new file and finally read the file and display all its contents. So we will modify the previous code. Here we first need to check whether it exists or not. If it exists, we need to first display its contents, then append it, and then display its contents again. Otherwise, write it to a new file and display its contents. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have gotten the text to be appended, and let's also get the file name in this case. Enter name of file. So we take both these things as an input from the user. Now the first thing, what do? We will check whether this file exists. So we can just say fs.access fname. Now if error is truthy, what does it mean? File does not exist. Else what does it mean? File exists. This is what it means. So let's maybe do the second case first. If the file exists, what do we need to do? We need to first read the content. So fs.readFile fname comma utf8 comma, let's just delete this code. It's function error comma say content. Else what will we say? Console.log, let's say it before. So before we are appending it, what's the content? Content. So we have printed it. Now that we have printed it, what do we need to do? We need to append it. So fs.appendFile fname comma, what is it? Text comma function error if error console.log error. Else now our append is successful, so we need to now read the file again and print it, or we can just say console.log append successful, and now we will read the file again. So fs.readFile fname comma utf8 comma function error comma content. Again, what do we do here? If error console.log error, else console.log, let's say after, so after the append comma content. So this would be our code. So first we have read the file, we have displayed the content before and the content, then we have appended it and then displayed append successful, and then we have read the file again and printed it. Now this case remains. If file does not exist, what will we do? We will use writeFile fname comma text comma function if console.log error, else console.log write successful, and now we need to read and display the text. So fs.readFile fname comma utf8 comma function remember these parameters, we could have given it any name. So let me, for displaying that, change the name to err1 and content1. So if err1 console.log err1, else console.log content1. So this is our code. So we first check for access. Within the access callback function, we checked for error. If error is truthy, which means this file did not exist, it gave us an error. We first wrote it to the file and then displayed the contents within the callback function. And in the else, we first read the file, then appended text to it, and then put it here. And very carefully notice how we have written this code. Now that we have done it, let's run this code. Name of the file, let's say put it to say the file we were using earlier, let's say put it to say the file we were using earlier, abcd.txt 1 2 3 4. So before was this append was successful, and after we have just appended this text here. Let's run it again. So now let me say a1.txt. This file does not exist. Let's see what will happen. And what do we want to append to it? A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z. So write successful and we got this text. Now if I try and do it for the same file again, a1.txt, what to be written? 88. So before was this was the text we got. We appended it and after that we got it. So we are getting them in absolutely the right order and everything is getting called. So this is how we would write a code with asynchronous using callback functions.